Commissioner Tony Clark is serving his first 5-year term on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Before his appointment to FERC, Clark served for 12 years as a member of the North Dakota Public Service Commission. While at the North Dakota Commission, Commissioner Clark worked on a wide array of energy issues and oversaw regulatory proceedings that permitted more than $5.5 billion in new investment in North Dakota through expanded wind, coal, and oil and gas infrastructure. In November 2010, Commissioner Clark served as president of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. Prior to his election to the PSC, Commissioner Clark was North Dakota's labor commissioner and is a former state legislator representing Fargo in the State House of Representatives from 1994 to 1997. Commissioner Clark is a graduate with honors from NDSU, all right, and he holds an MPA from the University of North Dakota. Please help me welcome Commissioner Tony Clark.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I sometimes feel, I think I need to revise my bio because I sometimes feel like South Dakota gets the short shrift on my biography because it doesn't really appear anywhere there, but actually South Dakota has a very soft spot in my heart for the state. Like with a lot of biographies, they'll name where you were born, and then they say graduated from high school here and went on to college here. Well, I was born in Wisconsin, but at a very early age moved to Pierre, and actually most of my formative years were in Pierre. I didn't, until I was a teenager and almost in high school, didn't move to North Dakota, so my biography reads Wisconsin, North Dakota, and then off to DC. But I owe a great debt of gratitude to the state of South Dakota. I've often thought that my own career choice in deciding to pursue public service, probably as much as anything, was the result of having grown up in a town like Pierre, where every day when I looked out my bedroom window, you oversaw the Capitol building and the dome of the Capitol and the light on top of it blinking off in the distance. Just a stone's throw from Riggs High School is where I grew up. Every day, I think probably during junior high school, especially during snowy times of the year, I would trudge right through the middle of the Capitol. It was the shortest way to get home. You can't grow up in an environment like that and not really think about how you can make a difference in public service. So I think probably as much as anything I owe that to the state of South Dakota. Whenever I'm back here in the Midwest, I'm often reminded at what a small world it is, and I see lots of friends around the crowd here. Christy, welcome to you. Your public utility commissioners, Gary and Chris, I saw earlier as well. Welcome. Right here on the dais, Ken Rutter from Basin Electric actually bought my house when I moved to Washington, D.C. a few years ago. But the whole Midwest is like that, right? I was in St. Paul maybe a week or two ago, and I was eating at a restaurant. I was there for a MISO meeting, and I was eating at a restaurant. It was one of these restaurants that it was a Know Your Farmer kind of restaurant. So they'd list where they got the different produce from and meat products and so on and so forth. I was there with the group. I looked down the list. My brother-in-law's farm is where they got the chickens and beef from. After telling this to the table, even then a few people ordered the fish, which smelled a little funny to me, but I guess, you're 2,000 miles from an ocean, order what you want. I went with the chicken myself. But being here in Sioux Falls in South Dakota brings back many fond memories, most of them, a few painful memories that I think about. When I was a young man, I shattered my elbow, and at the time, Pierre didn't have any orthopedic surgeons, so my parents rushed us to Sioux Falls, where I had my elbow operated on, and I guess it was McKinnon Hospital at the time. It still works great, so thanks to that hospital system. And it always does feel like home here in South Dakota. I would say the North Dakota State football team says the same thing. It feels like home. Okay, sorry. Look, I am still a North Dakotan, all right. Anyway, thank you for the invitation. I'm glad that I could be here today. Growing up in this part of the world, I think, is really a special thing, because one of the things that you quickly learn is that you tend to not take things for granted when you grow up on the Great Plains. You don't take a good economy for granted in your state because you know that in a commodity-based economy like ours here in the Midwest, what looks like a really good economy one year, depending on the weather and prices worldwide, can turn upside down just like that. You don't take good weather for granted because you know probably in a few hours or at least a few months the weather can turn. You don't take your community for granted because you know that even though we're pretty independent-minded in the Dakotas and in the Great Plains, and we value our individualism, in a climate like this, you really can't get by without community and your friends and neighbors, and we've all seen that in our own lives. And one of the things that I think we find more and more is, one of the speakers talked about a little bit earlier, but I think it's really important to emphasize, and I'll probably spend most of my time talking about with you here today, is that you can't take for granted affordable, reliable electricity and power. It can be easy to take it for granted, but we really shouldn't. I do fear that sometimes in Washington there is a bit of taking that for granted, which we have here in the Great Plains, especially as it relates most recently to a suite of regulations that I'm sure you all have heard about, and I'm going to spend most of my time talking about today, which is the Clean Power Plan, or 111D carbon regulations. It's a sweeping set of regulations, really unlike anything that the utility industry has had to deal with here in the past. One of the great challenges with it, and it's not entirely EPA's fault, it's the way the Clean Air Act itself is written, is this is an interstate grid, as you all know, that we run, and yet the Clean Air Act itself is written to be complied with on a state-by-state basis. And trying to fit those two regimes over the top of each other can be very, very challenging. The EPA regulations that are coming down the pike put all of us in this room in a very awkward position. The reason is because it's not our rule. It's not FERC's rule. It's not a rule that the utility industry, that co-ops have necessarily asked for. And it's not the rule that governors have written, or state legislators, or state health departments, or all those who are actually going to have to implement it. But it's a rule where if you talk about all of the potential challenges that could come out of it, almost all of them are squarely within our wheelhouse, because it's not going to be, if affordability suffers, if reliability suffers, your constituents, your consumers aren't going to be picking up the phone and calling EPA. They're going to be calling you, they're going to be calling FERC commissioners, they'll be calling their congressmen who'll be calling FERC commissioners, they'll be calling their governors and state health departments and PUCs and saying, what's going on? So whether we want the fight or not, the fight seems to want us, and we're going to have to all be engaged in the industry. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to with EPA, open forums that they've had with FERC, so on and so forth, where EPA officials will say nothing that we have done in the past has ever affected reliability, and so implicitly nothing that can be done would ever affect reliability. Well, of course, that's a fallacy. The problem with that is, first off, actually there are a number of times we've had in the past where utilities face a decision where they have to either abide by their environmental regulator or their reliability regulator and offend one or the other in trying to operate the grid that they've got. Secondly, I think that there is a failure to appreciate just how difficult the work is of making this grid, this tremendously complex machine, work. It takes the best engineers and utility planners and regulators in the world to make this system work. And we've got right now the envy of the world when it comes to power delivery. I think there's an important reason why we talk about affordability and reliability together, because they really are linked at the hip. They're two sides of the same coin, is what I often say. People ask me all the time, either through congressional inquiries or when I go out and speak somewhere, can you guarantee that if the Clean Power Plan is fully implemented, that you'll have blackouts? And I always tell them I can't guarantee that. And the reason that I say that is because we really do have the best utility planners, the best engineers, and as I said, the best regulators in the world that have made this work. And they will go to extraordinary lengths to make sure that electric reliability is maintained. And they're very good at keeping the lights on. But what can suffer when you have to make some of these really tough decisions is affordability suffers because of it. From a market standpoint, FERC is a market regulator in many parts of the country. The way that you deal with a reliability challenge from a purely market standpoint is you just keep letting prices go up and up and up until customers on their own self-select to start turning the power off, and that's how you maintain grid reliability. For other types of systems, the way you deal with it is you sometimes build power plants that you wouldn't otherwise build, or you shut down power plants that are otherwise useful assets. So while I can't guarantee that you're going to have a reliability problem, what I can guarantee is there's not a cheap way to deal with this particular rule as it's promulgated, especially in certain parts of the country. And that's perhaps one of the more harrowing things that all of us who call the Northern Great Plains are dealing with right now. You don't need a $200,000 consultant study to know that this is the case when you look at exactly what it's going to mean on a plant-by-plant basis. Because you just look at what has happened in other parts of the world and just across the country in areas that have basically adopted already what 111D is aiming to do. First of all, if you look at other parts of the country and the world that have done it, you turn away from traditional sources of baseload power. Sometimes, as I said, baseload power that may still have a lot of its useful life in it and has a high sunk cost, and so you're getting rid of assets that haven't been depreciated. Secondly, you turn towards heavily subsidized feed-in tariffs, heavily subsidized behind-the-meter type generation, heavily subsidized intermittent resources that you build before you have the transmission, either electric transmission or the pipelines hooked up to be able to back up that sort of intermittent resource and make it work. Because intermittent resources can, but not without a lot of transmission and not without peaking units and gas plants and things like that to back them up. And then you tell people, don't worry about all of it because energy efficiency will come in and save the day. Now, I love energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is great. It's going to be a very important part of the grid in the future. But I'm telling you, there aren't enough curly light bulbs in the world to offset some of these costs if you're retiring hundreds of millions and billions of dollars worth of assets that would otherwise be used. And you just look at some of the examples. Germany basically went down exactly this path. Germany rates, which used to be relatively competitive by continental European standards, are now 3 times what we pay here in the U.S. You don't even need to really look abroad. There are 2 areas of the country that have effectively basically done what the 111D regulations are calling for and kind of act as a template for what the EPA has used to promulgate the rule. And it's New England and it's California who've already gone down this path. Lincoln, the Public Power District in Lincoln, Nebraska, put out a very good survey that we happened to dig up on the internet that had a number of comparisons across states in terms of average utility bills. If you look at California right now, which has implemented a lot of these things, the average residential bill in California is $242 a month. I looked up South Dakota's on the way here. South Dakota's about $123. If you look at industrial consumers in California, $62,000 a month average bill. It's $35,000 here in South Dakota. In New England, if you take as one example, Connecticut, $244 average monthly bills on the residential side, and $96,000 industrial rates. On an average basis, South Dakota's less than half that. So it doesn't take a genius to see what happens when you make some of these choices. These are the real-world policy implications. What's particularly difficult for this part of the country especially is this rule does not fall evenly on consumers around the country. If you were to, some of you may have seen, they have maps that are out there that show the difficulty of each state's, the strenuousness of each state's target that they have to meet. South Dakota is a very difficult target. North Dakota's is tougher yet. Montana's is very difficult. Basically, you have these color-coded maps. It looks like a bullseye has basically been printed over the central and north-central parts of the country. And of the top 10 states, I can probably rattle most of them off. It's North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Nebraska, Wyoming, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois is in there, and Michigan. It's basically the north-central part of the country that's being asked to take the brunt of this. In this part of the country, it's even worse yet in a sense for a couple of reasons. Number one, we don't have the really old coal plants like they have in the Ohio River Valley that were probably on their way out anyway. 60-year-old coal plants that were going to be retired because it was just time for them to retire. They happen to be on top of the Marcellus Shale, so they've got ample gas resources to replace. We have relatively new coal in this part of the country that effectively was built by mandate of federal law. You had to build coal at the time that it was put in, but they still may have half their useful lives yet left. in a region that's maybe 80% coal-based, if you're being asked to reduce carbon emissions by 50% over a very short period of time, it's very hard to see how you do that without simply turning off plants that are otherwise useful and converting them into something else. The other reason that it's very challenging is this is an energy-intensive part of the world. The type of industry that operates in places like the Midwest is different than a lot of the economic sectors in the West Coast and the East Coast. If you look at the economic, sort of what drives the economy of, say, the Boston area, it tends to be financial services and things like that, education, large medical facilities, things that aren't really all that energy intensive. Production agriculture is an energy intensive business. And across the Midwest, it's that same way. Industrial manufacturing is very energy intensive. So in more ways than one, it becomes very difficult from an economic standpoint for this part of the country especially. There's a great quote that stuck in my mind for a long time. Bob Dole, when he accepted the 1996 Republican nomination, he had a quote about something to the effect of, you don't grow up on the Great Plains without having a keen awareness of distance. Isn't that true? The idea of distance really defines who we are as a people on the Great Plains. And one of the things that we've always used to overcome that distance, to be able to get our products to market, to be able to compete in a global marketplace, is affordable power. And if we don't have that affordable power, we lose one of the greatest competitive advantages that this part of the country has traditionally had. So, what do we all do about it? Number one, I think it's very fair to ask, and I know that your Attorney General here in South Dakota has been at the forefront of this. It's very fair to ask that this rule, whether it's the EPA itself, whether it's the courts, whether it's Congress, forbear from implementing the rule until the legal challenges are over with the rule. And here's why it's so important that that happens. We do not want to have happen what just happened with the Mercury and Air Toxic Standards rule, the MATS rule. Very expensive rule for the utility industry to comply with. Very protracted legal battle. So what you had going on was, while the rule was in effect and while the legal battle was going on, you had utilities spending hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to meet Mercury and Air Toxic Standards rules, which they needed to do under the law, get to the end of a very long process. After all the money's already been spent, Supreme Court just came out this last summer, and what did they say? The whole thing was promulgated illegally. By that time, all the money's out the door. That's chump change compared to what it'll take to comply with the Clean Power Plan. Really, from just a standpoint of good government, we should wait on this until we know that they're on sound legal footing. I know there was a survey of lawyers that said, the question was asked, do you think that the Clean Power Plan will be upheld? They were split right down the middle, 50-50. 50% thought it would be, 50% thought that it would be 50% thought it'd be thrown out, 50% thought the EPA would be upheld. The interesting thing was, as a side note, there was actually a split amongst the legal profession itself. Practicing attorneys fairly overwhelmingly thought EPA was going to be overturned. Law professors pretty overwhelmingly thought that the EPA was going to be upheld. Number two, we need to be honest brokers of information. Those of us who are in the regulatory world, I think, can do this. I think co-ops can play an especially important role in this, because under the cooperative model, there's no tug between shareholders and having to answer to a public utility commission in most cases, and your customer. The customer is the owner of the company, and so there's an alignment there, and I think you can provide a lot of information to folks either in state government who will be implementing it or at the federal level to understand how, both as a utility, you're going to have to comply, but also what the impact is for your consumers, because your consumers are the owner of the company. Third, should the rule ultimately be upheld, as I said, I don't think there are any cheap ways to comply with it. I think there are expensive ways and very expensive ways to comply it. You will want to be engaging with your legislators, with your utility commissions, with the health departments and governors in each of your state to make sure that as they put together those plans, they're not choosing the most expensive ways to comply with it. And that'll be a challenge. There'll be a lot of tugs out there, but the information that you bring is vitally important. And then finally, I'd say be honest with your customers in terms of what's coming ahead. Set expectations right. There's nothing worse than having the wrong expectations. It's why I've been so frustrated from time to time on that issue that I talked about before, where folks will say, don't worry about it. got all these things, your bills are going to go down because energy efficiency is going to make them go down. If that's the expectation that you're setting for your consumers, it's setting everyone up in a situation where they're going to fail. So make sure you set those expectations right as you deal with your stakeholders. And then finally, stay involved with your associations, NRECA, your statewide association, all those folks who, working together, you can accomplish so much more than when you're working separately. And so all the efforts that you're putting in there will be very helpful as well. In closing, I'll just say this. A couple of generations ago, there was a group of leaders across this part of the country who banded together and said, it's not acceptable for rural America to be left behind. That's not okay. I'm sure all of you have had the same experience that I had running in a statewide office in North Dakota, where you'll go to co-op meetings and you will talk to people who can remember vividly the day that electricity came to their farm. They remember what life was like before that, and they remember what life was like after it, and it was a world of difference. So they don't take that for granted. But these generations of leaders, they came together and they got it done. The challenge for our generation is to ensure that vision is maintained. That working together we can ensure that the goal of affordable and reliable power to rural America is maintained, because that way of life is worth maintaining. With that, I'll stop. I don't know if there's any time. I'm happy to take questions if anyone has one, but thank you so much for the invitation to be with you here today.
Any questions for Tony?
All right, Bill.
So you were a champion, frankly, at FERC for bringing reliability into the conversation about the Clean Power Plan. So how do you feel about it now that it's kind of part of it, but kind of not?
It's good as far as it went. I personally would have liked to see, oh sure, the question was, I and a number of others at FERC were pushing fairly hard on the EPA to bring into the conversation the idea of reliability, that reliability had to be in the plan as a specific issue. And so we recommended a number of things. EPA adopted some of them to one degree or another. The ways that they have adopted and hopefully address some of it, but I still have some concerns, are this. There's something that's in the plan now. It's called the reliability safety valve, which is the idea that you may get into the plan itself and you find that there's a plant that everyone thought was going to be closing down at a certain time but can't close down because we've run the engineering studies and it's a reliability must-run unit. It has to be there. So there's an avenue for that. I think that was sort of the least that had to be, at least that had to be in there. So I was pleased that that's in there. I don't know that we'll ever quite get to that point, but it's good that it's there. There were a couple of other things. One had to do with before the plans go into effect, for working with NERC and working with all of the regions and utilities, we'll be doing some analysis to try to project as well as we can that the plans themselves won't cause a problem once all these various state plans that may not fit together particularly well start coming into effect. So that's in there as well. The third issue related to reliability that I think was kind of a half loaf, I wish we would have gotten more out of this, and is maybe the biggest one, is we asked for more time. It takes, as you all know, to build a major transmission project, which will be needed to hook up the amount of renewables that we're talking about, it takes years, especially the further west you get. If you're crossing federal lands, it's a 5, 10, 15-year process to get a transmission line built. And we're looking at timelines that in the original plan were really aggressive. We're talking 2020 they wanted the plan to go into effect. Some of the interim goal timelines, which were basically a hard cliff from a good portion of the utility industry, they pushed that back 2 years. It's better than nothing, but here's the problem you've got. The state plans, even assuming on the tightest timetable you could have, the state plans aren't going to be coming together till about 2018. Which means that you've got about 4 years before 2022 hits, when the first interim targets start hitting. Transmission projects in that short a time, major gas line projects in that short a time is a very, very aggressive timetable. let alone, I know nuclear isn't the first choice in this region of the country just because you've got lots of other choices, but if you look at places like the Southeast, and getting a nuclear plant built in 4 years, forget about it. These are $9 billion, 15-year projects to get projects like that built, and it's hard to see if we're going to switch major baseload generation off, how in certain parts of the country you aren't going to need more nuclear. So I think that's the biggest outstanding challenge that we didn't quite make enough progress on yet. Thanks for the question.
Can
Yeah,
you talk
Tom?
about switching from coal fuel to natural gas that has lots of price fluctuations and what that'll do?
Yeah, so the question is about switching from coal to gas. As with anything, there are benefits and drawbacks to every sort of fuel source. The great benefit of coal is it's very plentiful, it's very affordable, and from an operations standpoint, there was nothing more secure for a utility engineer to be able to look at that 30-day coal supply sitting in a pile outside of the unit. So you just had much more flexibility in how you ran the unit. The downside is, from an environmental standpoint, it's becoming a more and more challenging environment for coal. And so for all sorts of environmental reasons and pressure from natural gas, and now the EPA regulations, it's running into a great deal of challenges. Gas has a lot of beneficial qualities to it. It's a cleaner burning fuel. It's about 50, from a carbon standpoint, it's about 50% of the carbon of coal, so it gets you part of the way there if that's going to be a national standard. The challenge with gas is really twofold. Number one, the gas has to be flowing at precisely the time that you need it. So that pipeline system has to be very tightly integrated with the electric system, and you have to be able to depend on that gas at the time you need it. It's not like having that coal pile outside of it. And the second issue is the issue of cost. Historically, at least, natural gas is a very volatile fuel source from a price standpoint. It wasn't too long ago, there was a Secretary of Energy, Sam Bodman, who was Secretary of Energy in President Bush's administration in the early 2000s. He had this great quote. It was, using natural gas to produce electricity is like washing your dishes in your best scotch. And I used to quote it because I thought it was such a great quote. Well, natural gas prices cratered. Now nobody says that anymore. They're burning natural gas every day to make electricity, and for good economic sense. I mean, you can't beat it from a price standpoint when it's as affordable as it is. The sunk cost of the plant is a lot less than with other sources of baseload power. There's always this fear in the back of everyone's head, though. What's going to happen with prices if you become too dependent on it? It's a concern. I mean, you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket, as the saying goes. I think it really is true. There's at least some more comfort with gas than we've perhaps had in the past, in that it's a little bit more of a manufacturing process now than it was before. I mean, natural gas before was basically a wildcat operation, and either struck it or you didn't, and you had ideas where it was, but it was a much different type of industry. With the evolution of hydraulic fracturing, you know where the gas is, you know where these formations are, you know what the price point at which you're going to produce it, and it's a manufacturing process at that point. You just drill wells and drill into it. So there's a lot of gas in this country that hopefully alleviates some of those concerns, but it's, for any of us who've been in the industry for too long, for a number of years, you know how volatile it is. I mean, it wasn't too long ago, even in my 12 years on the North Dakota Public Service Commission, where we were putting through $11, $12 winter rates for natural gas, and that's within 6 or 8 years. Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Commissioner Clark just did a great job sort of outlining what the deal is here. There's not a lot I can add as far as where we're at with this. I guess, what bothers me a lot, though, being cooperatives, you entrust us to manage these assets for you in the most responsible and the most cost-effective way to deliver cheap rates. This is going to, if we go on forward with this is going to cost all of us. And I say us because we're in this together. I think this morning Tom was so dead on when he said that we're going to work on this together, because we are. And we've talked about it a lot. Just a few things about the whole Basin Electric situation. Mike Agel gave me a great article the other day, and it sort of listed the states who, from the original rules to the final rules, were hurt the worst. And there were 7 listed. Of the 7, we generate in 5 of those states. and North Dakota and Wyoming were the worst by far. North Dakota, and I'll just use that as an example, went from a reduction of 11% when the rules were first proposed to 45%. Yesterday, Governor Dalrymple called the cooperative CEOs who generate in North Dakota, myself, Dave Sagu from Great River, and Mac McLennan from Minn Kota to his office, and he kind of went, okay guys, what are we gonna do with this? And I thought we were in a 6th grade timeout, because we're all looking at each other like, Governor, we're really not sure. And he kind of smiled, because I think he knew what the answer was, because we're really not too sure about this, quite frankly. There's some things we need to get fixed. One of the things is they took away, the Basin family took a very bold step 10 years ago. We either contracted or built 700 megawatts of wind at Basin Electric, because we went to the board and we went to our membership and we said, we think something could be coming with carbon. And so because of that, it's a reliable, to the extent that the wind blows, obviously, and also it is zero cost fuel. And of course, we know something may be coming with carbon. And so the original rule, or when the rules first came out, went back to 2005 and used that as the base and then rolled forward with reductions from there. This rule now begins in 2012. So what happened? We constructed those assets, and now we don't get any credit for them. We need to get this fixed, because this is just really catastrophic in our case at Basin Electric, for our Basin member family and all of us. The other thing is, and Egil keeps telling me, quit harping on it, you here own the largest sequestration project in North America. It's the Great Plains Synfuels plant. We have sequestered 30 million tons of CO2 already to date. And we don't get any credit for that. Now I get it, it's not an electric generating unit. But come on, it's coal-based, and we took a very bold step, you the membership and the board, years ago to construct that project. We should get a little bit of credit for that. And the other thing, and Commissioner Clark just nailed it here a few minutes ago, each state has to submit a plan. And so when we're a 5-state generator, meaning that we would have to go to each one of these states, or have to go to each one of these states and try and figure out a plan in each one of these states with other utilities in these states. And so my sense would be, if we could somehow get the states to work together, it would really benefit us as a membership. That's one of the things we're working on in the immediate term. In the immediate term, we're hoping that all of the states will file for the extension, and the extension meaning that if they file within 1 year, they get out to 2018. Because Commissioner's right, we need time. We need time to work on this a little bit. Whether there can be a stay here to stop action for a while, I think some believe that this could happen. We're not sure yet. We're hopeful. I like to say this. The other day I had employee meetings, and a lot of the employees that are engaged, and particularly our young employees, very, very engaged. Not the old ones too, Claire, I know, but the young employees are very engaged in this. I had many questions, and at the end I would just say, well, there's probably 3 sure things in life now: death, taxes, and this thing getting litigated, because it will get litigated. I recall Gina McCarthy being a little over a year ago now, being at the Synfuels plant, and she said, it's not going to matter what I do. She said, it's going to get litigated. Doesn't matter. And so they know it's going to get litigated. We know it's going to get litigated. On an internal basis, we've assembled a task force. We're trying to figure out Basin Electric's numbers. We committed to Governor Dalrymple, at least in North Dakota, the co-ops did yesterday, to get our numbers together, start working together a little bit to see what options we could have so that he could help us. We met with Governor Mead last week, Thursday. Mike and I did. Governor Mead is the current chairman of the Western Governors Association. He committed to reaching out to some of the other governors in the Upper Great Plains, because the commissioner was absolutely right. You take a map, and NRECA has this map, it's just beet red in the Upper Great Plains, and it's North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Iowa, it's all of those states. And so he agreed to sort of reach out to some of the other governors. So we're going to keep working on this, guys. We're committed to it. Our commitment to you is to hold your costs down and deliver the most effective way, because these are your assets, and we get it at Basin Electric. So thank you for support. We're going to need your help. We're going to need your help. We're going to need NRECA's help. We're going to need our Class A managers and all of our members' help. We're going to need everybody's help to work on this. But Anyway, more to come, and thanks to all of you for your continued support. We at Basin really very much appreciate it. Thanks to the board and to Tom. Thank you.